I, first of all, would like to share with you that Terry was just like any one of you people in this room today. Your children, all the children that were out there today at that, the fabulous run that took place. He was very ordinary, he was average, and he wasn't any different than anybody else. And unfortunately for his dad and I don't think we realized what type of a son we were raising until Terry wasn't with us any longer. And we look back and we think about a number of things and almost feel, at least I personally feel, horrified to think that I didn't see and understand that this kid of mine who was getting heck and sent to his room for saying something or doing something, I now realize was setting up to be the type of young man that he became. Terry was always a person that believed in hard work. And he had a motto: work at it until you get it right. And that was whether he played a sport, schoolwork, or any project he took on. He really believed that anything was possible. We just had to try. When he first went to junior high school in grade 8, he wanted to play basketball. He loved the game even then. And the first practice he went to, the coach, Bob McGill, said, "Terry, you'll never make a basketball player. You're too small. You'll never be tall enough. You're not fast enough. Why don't you take up wrestling, cross country, another sport? You'll never make basketball." And when I'm talking to young people in the schools, I always say to them, I really felt that that was very unfair to my son. I don't think any teacher or anybody should tell a young person that they aren't going to be good enough. I think they should be given the time and the support to prove themselves. Well, Terry didn't get that time and support, and he would come home at night, practice. We would get so angry with him because the first thing in the morning he'd be up and gone off to school to hit that gymnasium before anybody else came into school to practice basketball. And before long, he became a starting guard on that team. So I like to say to anyone here, never say never. Never say to anybody of any age, you're not good enough. Because if that person may be like Terry and wants to set his goals very high and practices or studies or works really hard at whatever they're doing, they can achieve what they want to do, just like Terry did. Terry was very stubborn, competitive, very determined, and he absolutely loved a challenge. He always gave 100%, and very often more than 100%. And even through his marathon of hope, and when he had to end it, he said, "I gave it everything I had. And I'm proud that I did, because I have nothing to be upset with having to end my run, because I gave it everything." And that was the type of person Terry was. He was good at most sports, but some of them, even schoolwork, it took a lot of practice, a lot of study, and before long, he could compete with the next guy or the next girl. He was lots of fun. He was a real character. And one of the things I miss terribly about not having him with me is the poke in the ear, the punch in the arm, those kinds of things, maybe stick a leg out, try to trip me. Anything that he could do to make you laugh. He was a terrible tease. He was very funny. I would say out of our 4 children, my 5 children, including Dad, and you'll get me for that, won't you? That he was the biggest comedian in the family. He really was. He was really funny. But Terry had something that wasn't very good, and that was a temper. And we all have tempers. And I love it when I talk to the school children and say, you know, you're young yet, and maybe you're like Terry. And maybe you hate to lose like Terry did too, because Terry felt he should win at everything he did. It was difficult to share with him that you have to lose sometimes, and it's okay. But when he lost in a game, playing cards at home, if he lost too many games, well, guess what? 52 pickup, he flew through them. A board game would go flying. When he was on the field playing soccer, rugby, basketball, very often you'd see a runner go through the air. A water bottle, because either he hadn't played well or his whole team hadn't. And he would get very angry about that. So I always share with young people, if you are like Terry Fox and you do have a temper and you want to win, please try to control that now. Get over it. We all have to lose at something. Terry graduated in 1976 as co-athlete of the year with his friend and the driver of his van, Doug Allward. That fall, he went to Simon Fraser University. And I remember during the summer as he worked for the city of Port Coquitlam, and he always worked with mentally handicapped young people. And Terry telling his friends, he'd often come home and say, you know, Mom, I told the guys that when I go to Simon Fraser University this fall, I want to try out for the SFU Klansmen basketball team. He said they laughed at me. They told me I was wasting my time. I wasn't any good and I wasn't going to make it. But he said, I really don't care what they think. It's been a dream to play on a university basketball team, and I want that opportunity to try. So Terry was there when it came out time for tryouts. And that year it was a really great tryout. They had brought someone in from the military, from the Army, to put them through maneuvers that they do when they're teaching their men to crawl through forests. And I don't think they had to wear weeds on their head or anything like that, but I remember they had to crawl up at one point, halfway up Burnaby Mountain. And I think most of us know how steep and high that is, and that was part of their training. And when training period was over, Terry was not dropped. But the coach has said he wasn't the caliber of player that we really needed or wanted. But he had so much guts. And he worked so hard, there was no way we could cut him from the team because everybody needed someone like him on any type of a team there was. And of course, he actually got to play. He didn't just ride the bench. And it was during that season of basketball, it was nearing to an end. Terry's knee had been very sore for several months. We'd say, please see a doctor. I haven't got time. It'll be fine. It's hurting now, but in a while it'll go away. And it usually did. On a couple of occasions, he did give in and go to the doctor at Simon Fraser University. He was given painkillers, which helped for a while, but eventually even they didn't do any good. And one morning, he got up to go to university. He'd had an accident in his car. And Terry always was having accidents. And he came home. And I remember sitting in our front room window watching him, wishing I could go to help. I couldn't. I just had surgery on 2 of my feet. I only have 2 feet. On the 2 feet I have. Oh, Lord. Anyway, I told you I haven't done this for a while. So I watched him. Nobody else was home. Nobody could go and help him, and he was having a terrible time. I'll never forget. I had to wait till he came into the house. And the first thing he said was, Mom, I need a doctor. I can hardly walk. We waited till his dad came home from work that afternoon. We didn't even make an appointment to go to see our family doctor, but Raleigh took him down immediately. And for some reason, our doctor knew whatever it was that Terry had was serious. Today, this many years, 28 years later, I still marvel at that. Because often, it doesn't work that way. You usually have to do many other things before the doctor really realizes something is serious. So the doctor was able to get Terry an appointment at Royal Columbian Hospital the following morning at 8 o'clock with a specialist. Raleigh took him in, and he was examined by many doctors. Many x-rays were taken, scans, all types of things. And Raleigh called me about noon that day, and I can remember sitting at home being so upset because I was the one that was always with my kids when something happened. Their dad was there too, but so was I, and I wasn't. All of a sudden, the phone rang, and it was Raleigh, crying his heart out. Dr. Piper had called him into an office where Terry couldn't hear. And he said, we're pretty sure Terry has bone cancer and osteogenic sarcoma. And he said, we haven't got a bed for him yet, but we wish that you would take him out for lunch. By then, when you come back, we'll have a bed for him. And then he had the nerve, I think, to say to Raleigh, please act normal, don't let him know. And Raleigh called me, many tears from both of us when he told me what was wrong. And so I tried my best to get Raleigh's confidence up so that he could go back to Terry, spend the rest of that time with him, and not spill the beans. Later on in the day, he came home. Raleigh got me. We went back with all our children. We're all there. And Dr. Piper came in and said, I'd like you all to come down to another room, because Terry was put in a pediatric ward. He was 18 years old, and he looked pretty darn funny, this great big tall kid with all these little ankle biters and some sucking on bottles and what do you call those things? Soothers, I guess they're called nowadays. To me, they're dummies. He took him out of the room and took us all to another room. And he said to Terry, I wish I could tell you, you have a sports injury. I can't, because that's not what you have. What you have is bone cancer. You have just below and to the side of your right knee. And the bone cancer that you have is called an osteogenic sarcoma. He said, well, I've dealt with many other doctors. We've all come to the conclusion that the only thing that's going to work is amputation. After that, there will be chemotherapy treatment, and we hope that's going to save your life. Terry was 18 years old. He didn't know anything about cancer. It was something that happened to somebody else. That's what Raleigh and I thought. Would never happen to us. Would never happen to our kid. But it does. Terry cried very hard. He cursed a little bit as well. He cleared himself up in only a few minutes, and he said, I've always tried hard, but now I'm going to have to try harder than I ever have before, because I'm not ready to leave this world. Those were his exact words. Right away, he took the challenge of having cancer. It wasn't going to beat him. He wasn't going to feel sorry for himself. He would beat cancer. Of course he was devastated. Of course he was. But he would never let you know, not his family. And you know what? The worst part of the whole ordeal for Terry, and I'll never figure this out, wasn't having cancer. He accepted it. He accepted the loss of his leg because he knew he could play other sports. So what if I got an artificial leg, was basically what he thought. But when his hair started to fall out from chemotherapy treatment, even though he knew it was going to happen, he couldn't handle it. It was a terrible part. The worst part of the whole ordeal for him was the loss of his hair. And I believe, for me, it was the worst part for me, trying to help him get through that part. And I won't go into any detail, there's lots, but I won't go into that. And many cancer patients that I've shared that with over the years have said, we know what you're talking about, because we have felt the very same way. The night before his amputation, a high school basketball coach brought him in a magazine, a runner's magazine, and there was a story about a man who had run the New York Marathon. Tara read the article. Later, he said to all of us, if that guy can run a marathon with an artificial leg, then someday I should be able to run as well. And by golly, I think of that a lot too, because I know the next morning if I was going to be having a limb of mine removed, I would not be thinking about what I might be able to do in the future. I'd be feeling pretty damn sorry for me. Tara never did that. And that was his beginning of thinking about maybe running. He took 16 months of chemotherapy treatment at the Vancouver Cancer Clinic. We lived in Port Coquitlam in those days, and we would drive him in. Terry would not take treatment as an outpatient. He absolutely refused to, because he didn't want me to go through what he was going through. And so when it was time for a treatment, we'd take him in. He'd take his treatment all night long. The following day, if he was able, if his bone marrow, his blood was up fine, he would come home. And he hated it there. It was an old building in those days. He wouldn't drink their juice. He didn't like their food. Now, some people might think, you spoiled brat, you should have ate it anyway. But we understood, because it was an old building. And there was so many sick people around him that we would take his food or take him out once we got there and let him have his juices and everything from home. And it was during that time that he looked around and he came home with stories of other people. He never would share with us what he was going through or how he felt or how sick chemotherapy made him. It was a story of all the other people. Those that they would be happy about because they were doing really well and were sure that they would make it. Maybe a month or a week later, that person wasn't with us any longer. And he thought it was so unfair. And in those days, the beds were crammed into a room. Terry was really upset about that. He said they have no dignity left. Everything is taken away. They can't share with their loved ones how much they love them. Can't talk privately because everybody in that room could hear. And he never would allow us to be in there. We always had to go and sit in an outer room so that he could talk privately and those people could at least try to speak privately with their own guests. It was very difficult for him. He thought there wasn't enough being done. And during that 16 months of chemo, he started to read, what's cancer research? Because our Tara never went to the store for a quart of milk or a loaf of bread without looking in the bread box to make sure we needed it, or the fridge to see if we really needed it. And he wasn't any different about cancer. He wanted to know what it was. Not just what he had, but what in the heck was cancer? He had to find out. He wrote a couple of papers at university on it as well. And that's when he learned there was not very much money going to cancer research. And I used to sort of scold him because he used to compare Canada to the US. He said, look at the US, just about all their money comes from their government. Here in Canada, almost all our money comes from people who make donations. And he said, it's not right. Something has to be done. And in the 1977, 8, 9, Canada was way down the list of cancer research happening in this country. Canada is now a second or third, I believe, in research. And Terry, but that's what made Terry very upset. He knew from what he read, the only way we would find the answers to cancer was if our scientists had the money to do their work. It's a complicated disease. It's very, very costly. And he knew that. His chemo was almost finished when Terry started to train. He first of all trained by lifting weights. He'd get in his wheelchair, which he only used to play wheelchair sports. He'd wheel Burnaby, Westwood Mountain, to help strengthen his upper body. Very often, Rick Hansen was with him because they had become very good friends through wheelchair basketball. When Terry got his upper body strengthened from lifting of weights and all those other things, he then decided he was ready to start running. He never shared with us the first time he went to the nearby school that had a cinder track to see if he could run for the first time. And when he came home, he said, Mom, I ran a quarter of a mile for the first time. Most of it was spent falling down, picking myself up. But I did it. I did a quarter of a mile. And every day I'm going to improve. And of course he did. Terry trained for 14 months. He ran at one point for 100 days in a row without a day off. He then took Christmas Day off, but he said, only to please Mom, or I would have been out there running. He had actually ran over 3,000 miles in training in BC as well. Very few people know that. Over 3,000 miles in training. And that 3,000 miles in training, he shared with us that he was training to run the Vancouver Marathon. I had no idea why he was really training. 1st of September in 79, 1st of September, long weekend, he went to Prince George to participate in what they used to call a Prince George to Boston marathon. And it never was a marathon, it was a 9 or a 17-mile race. Daryl, Terry's younger brother, his friend Doug Allward went up with them, and another young man, forgot. Sorry about that. Anyways, they went to Prince George to participate in this race. Terry was going to do 9 miles. And on the way up, the boys said to him, well, Terry, if you can do 9, you should be able to do the 17. That's all he needed. He did the 17 miles. And he was so excited that he had finished the race. The following day, they came back from Prince George. I was home alone, and he came to me and he said, Mom, I have something to share with you. I haven't been telling the truth. I haven't been training to run the Vancouver Marathon. He said, I've been training because I'm going to run across Canada. I know I'm now ready because of just doing the 17 miles. I know I'm ready now. Well, I was a pretty shocked mom. I think he's the only kid of mine out of 4 who pulled the wool over my eyes. Eventually, I found out all their things that I should have known before, and they wouldn't tell me. And that day, I screamed and I hollered, and he said, and I said many things we can't repeat. I thought it was the stupidest, dumbest thing this kid of mine who I thought was intelligent could possibly do. To think of an able-bodied person running across Canada was enough. But my son with an artificial leg, Didn't think it was possible. Didn't think it was right that he should try it. I said, why can't you just run across British Columbia and raise money that way? He said, because not only people in BC get cancer. And he was right. He left that day almost taking the front door with him. And Terry had a very special place that he used to go to think things over when he had something that he had to make a decision on. And he's not far from there today. He came back a while later. We sat down and we talked about it. And I learned that day that this wasn't a foolish idea that had just popped into his head. But it had been up there really since the night before his amputation. When he read about the amputee who had ran a marathon, and he said, I should be able to do that. When he looked around on the hospital wards and saw all the people with cancer, the ones that he left behind, and he wanted to help. And when he read that there was not very much money in Canada for cancer research, those are the things that decided Terry, if one day he could run, he would run across Canada. Everything was up here. Where he was going to start, where he would finish, who he was going to ask for support. Everything was here, waiting to let people know. I listened. I asked many questions, and he had an answer for everything. Then he gave me the hardest task of all, to tell his dad. And I remember Raleigh worked afternoons in those days in CNR. And Terry always came to work to get me. And every day after that, he said, Mom, have you told Dad? I said, no, not yet. A couple of days, 3 days would go on. And I'd say, no, not yet. And then on Friday, he came and picked me up, and he said, Mom, did you tell Dad last night? And I said, well, no, Dad works afternoon. Now I got to get up in the morning to go to work. You know, we don't have time to talk. And he said, well, you better hurry up, because I'm going to have a meeting here tomorrow with some people, and Dad's going to wonder what's going on. So we got home that night, and Raleigh was on days off, and he was in front of the idiot box watching some stupid sport. And I went down and I said, Raleigh, I really have something to tell you. And I would like you to sit there, to shut up, and don't say a word. And he did. It's a miracle. I should try it more often. Anyway, all Raleigh said was, when? He later shared with us that he knew something was going on, and eventually somebody would let him in on it. And Raleigh and I both believed that we would never change Terry's mind. We realized that he hadn't been a foolish child or young man. He hadn't made many mistakes, and most things we never could talk him out of. And so we got behind and supported him all we could. And finally, on April the 7th, he and Doug, all by their lonesomes, left on an airplane for St. John's, Newfoundland, to start what Terry eventually would call his Marathon of Hope. That was one of the worst days in my whole life, was saying goodbye to this kid. He said goodbye to everybody and left Mom to last. And I remember clinging to him, sobbing like a baby. And finally I said, Terry, just go, get out of here. And he got on the airplane. And on April the 12th, 1980, he was able to dip his artificial leg into the Atlantic Ocean to start what he eventually called his Marathon of Hope. From April the 12th till September the 1st, 1980, Terry averaged a marathon every day. 26 miles every day for 143 days in a row. I think of that often. Raleigh and I retraced Terry's footsteps in 1980. We did absolutely everything that Terry did. We thanked the restaurants who donated food, the hotels that would donate rooms when he was in a town that they didn't have to use the van. We went to homes and we saw his picture in their homes along with their families. They would share with us that Terry sat on this chair and he slept in that bed, and this is what we fed them for dinner. All those things we learned. Boy, were we tired at the end of a day. We were tired, we were cranky. Well, just outside of Thunder Bay, Ontario on September the 1st, 1980. Terry had not been feeling well for a couple of weeks. The boys said he coughed a lot. He was extremely irritable. They really didn't know what was wrong with him, and he wouldn't tell them. And that one morning, he really felt lousy. He said, "Mom, I didn't feel like getting up. I wanted to stay cuddled up in my bed. But I knew I had to get my run in because I have to get through the prairies and the mountains before the snow flies." So he got up, he went out onto the highway where there was many, many people waiting to cheer him on. He ran several miles that morning. He stopped and had his rest period. And then he went out and he ran some more miles. And I think he put in either 21 or 22 miles that morning of September the 1st, 1980. And then when there was no one else left on the highway to cheer him on. And at this point, I'll say that so many people I've met that saw Terry on his run said, you know, it was so wonderful because Terry never ignored them. He always had that beautiful smile on his face that we see up here and always would wave like this. He never ignored anybody. And so that morning or afternoon, when there was nobody left on the highway, and he went up to the van and he said to Doug, "Doug, I'm sick. Take me to the hospital." Doug took him into Thunder Bay General Hospital, where he was diagnosed with secondary cancer. The same cancer that had been in his knee had now spread to his lungs, and he had to return to Vancouver for more treatment. Terry said before he was put on the Learjet in Thunder Bay, "If I'm able, I'll be back out there to finish my run." But he said, if something happens that I can't, I don't want any one person to finish my run for me. But I ask Canadians not to forget how important it is to keep giving to cancer research. And by golly, Canadians have not let Terry down. For the past 25 years, everybody has rallied behind him, and his run is stronger now than it ever was before. When we learned that Terry wasn't going to survive cancer, a Toronto businessman by the name of Isidore Sharp, president and CEO or whatever of the Four Seasons Hotel, had supported Terry for several provinces and up to the finish and still today. And he called Terry one day and he said, "Terry, what do you think if we held something to perpetuate your Marathon of Hope?" Terry said, "What? What could we possibly do?" Mr. Sharp said, "Well, maybe we could have a run in your name annually." And Terry thought that was a wonderful idea, because then money would still be generated for research. Mr. Sharp later sent a telegram to Terry with his commitment that he would not stop until Terry's dream had been realized. I like to think if it hadn't have been for Mr. Sharp, there wouldn't have been that very first Terry Fox run, or the next 5 or 10 even. It's grown in itself since then. But it was Izzy Sharp who really was the instrumental person in keeping that dream alive and starting the runs. Terry died June 28, 1981, exactly 1 month short of his 23rd birthday. And the very first Terry Fox run was just a few months later, September the 13th, 1981. And of course, every year since then, all kinds of things are happening. We have senior citizens that are very, very involved in many, many provinces and are so welcome that finally we realize, us, seniors, after we quit work. And they're doing special events and coming out and participating in walks and so on and so forth. Our school children we saw today, what, about 4,000 in here in Victoria alone. There was 10,000 schools involved this morning across Canada, and over 1 million participants, 3 million school children that participated today in the runs. The corporations, many corporations are involved, but they're not involved to get their name intact with Terry Fox because we won't allow it. And many presidents, vice presidents, CEOs that I've spoken with over the years have said, what a wonderful idea. You come to us, you ask for support, you ask us to get all our staff members involved, but you don't ask for money. And you won't give us anything in return. And we're proud of that because now we're giving of ourselves and we're very proud to be involved. We have churches, villages, bikers, everything's happening out there. Not only in Canada, but in over 50 places around the world. And the run has been the single largest fundraising event for cancer research for a number of years. To date, over 360, well, haven't counted that in there, over $360 million has been raised in Terry's name. And I'm very proud to share with you that we operate the Terry Fox Foundation. It's a family organization. We operate it the way Terry asked us to. The policies, the guidelines, basically the guidelines that he set down for us, we still go by today because that is what is important. And I'm very proud to be able to share with people from the business world that 89 cents of every dollar that you give to Terry Fox each year goes directly to cancer research. Our fundraising costs and our administration costs are almost nilch. And boy, are we proud of that. And we feel, I shouldn't really say this, I suppose, that every nonprofit organization in Canada could do the same. We have 10 offices across Canada. We have wonderful staff, very few staff members that do this every year, and those wonderful volunteers who come out and support the donors, the people who believe, and are making it happen because they believe in cancer research. Terry once said, if I die of cancer, some good will come of it. I'd like to say to you, why did Terry know that? Why has his story gone worldwide? Why is the run more successful today than it ever was before? It's a miracle. I think part of it is Terry's honesty still shows through, his credibility, believing in what he was running for. Terry was not on an ego trip. He needed the media. He needed the people to share his story. That's all he wanted them for. So that his story could get out and he could raise money for research. He wanted nothing out of it himself. And in saying that, I'll share another little story, and I know I've gone on too long, but at Terry's very last Christmas, it breaks both Raleigh's and our heart. About a week before Christmas, he was sitting in the chair in front of the window, and he said, never complained before, but all of a sudden he said, "Here, I've raised all that money, and I haven't got $1 to buy my family a Christmas gift." But he was happy with what he had done. And I'm only sharing that with you because I think it's important for people to know that it was for cancer research and all the people he had left behind on cancer wards. It wasn't for him. He never lost sight of the reason he was doing his run. I know Terry watches over us very closely. He is my guardian angel. He is proud and he is happy of the volunteers, the participants, the donors, the scientists worldwide. I know if we weren't operating business the way he wanted it done, his leg would have tripped me up a number of years back and would still today. So I believe he knows and he likes the way we're operating his foundation. When I've been out into a country like Bangladesh, Dubai, Colombia, I've been to other countries as well, and I'm not saying that for any recognition, but I have to share with you, when I've gone to those third world countries, is the first time that I understood what my son had done. It took me over 20 years. And when I see those people who have absolutely nothing for themselves, 4,000 and 5,000 people out at a Terry Fox Run site, and the money that they raise in Canadian dollars is absolutely phenomenal. And they don't have any money for themselves. If you could, some of you could see how they live, it would blow you away. I think it's a good trip for all of us to go to some of those countries and just have a look around. I would like to say again, thank you to everyone who has donated anything for today, who continues over the past 25 years to donate at run sites, the apples, the oranges, whatever it may be. That is why we can keep our fundraising costs and our administration costs low, is because of people like you. And you are the unsung heroes of the Terry Fox Run. Not Terry's family, we're nothing. We're only here to share our story with you. You are the people that make it happen. You, all over Canada and all over the world. And if you didn't believe, and if you didn't care, over $360 million would not have gone to cancer research, nor would the 25th anniversary of Terry's Marathon of Hope be stronger threefold than it ever has before.